Welcome to the Refinement, Not Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Tony Coe, here podcasting on my own today and here to talk to you about the World War II celebrations, the D-Day celebrations, and to share some quite personal thoughts with you, dear listener, thoughts that have been inspired by hearing the very moving tributes to our war heroes. This episode is dedicated to my father, my dad, Thomas John Coe, who was born on the 24th of April, 1920. He died on the 5th of March, 2014, in his 94th year. Seeing the D-Day commemorations makes me realize how close we came, didn't we, to losing our fragile freedoms. And I wanted to just talk about that a little bit. And I will say that the D-Day commemorations reminded me of a wonderful trip that Christine and I made to Normandy a good few years ago when we stayed in the Band of Brothers house, no less. That's what it's called. You can find it on booking.com. We've recommended it to other people because it was an enchanting place to stay right in the square, the village square, the village being Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, where there is that church, that famous church where the liberation was celebrated by the troops. And that village was very important in the whole D-Day operation. A big thing that I remember from that trip that we made was the contrast between the beautiful, gleaming white American cemetery and the very black German cemetery. That was very impactful, just seeing that juxtaposition between those two cemeteries. But the thing that was the common denominator between the two cemeteries was reading the letters that the lads wrote home. Because they said much the same things. I mean, they were terrified, these young lads. Gosh, I mean, I think they were as young as 17 years old. The guys that came in the American landing vehicles, the amphibious landing vehicles, the landing vehicles that are so famous icons of the D-Day landing, many of them came from Dallas, didn't they? I mean, from all over from the US, but it's probably their first trip to Europe. In so many cases would have been their last trip anywhere, because so many of them were just mowed down on the beach as soon as the landing vehicle's front door drawbridge sort of thing went down. I mean, they just stood no chance, really, the people at the front on those landing vehicles. But as I say, they expressed very much the same fears and hopes and feelings in the letters that they wrote home. I mean, this is the sad thing about war, isn't it? I mean, well, there are so many sad things about war, but the young people that are caught up in it, they probably didn't even understand what they were fighting for, really, except in the most sort of general terms. But that was a very big thing. That cemetery, by the way, the American cemetery, which is beautiful, it is a beautiful experience, is featured in Saving Private Ryan. And there's a just incredible opening scenes where Spielberg really managed to capture, I think, the horror of those D-Day landings. So after seeing that movie and going there and knowing about my my father's experience. Not that I knew very much about it, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. So, as I say, this episode is dedicated to my father, my dad, Thomas John Coe. Like so many other veterans, he never really talked much about his wartime experiences. You just got little bits of knowledge that were dropped upon you from time to time, and I sort of I got some insight into his story, but just in skeleton terms, really. What I did know, it was that he fought, was captured, spent most of the year, he was captured in France, spent most of the war in a German prisoner of war camp, from which he was eventually liberated at the end of the war. Those were really the main milestones of his story and all I knew, really. But he came back to London to face the unimaginable. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Because I did know about this unimaginable part of it. It's been sort of in my mind one way or another throughout my life. And the unimaginable event was that he came back to the situation of his family home having been hit by a flying bomb, one of the Germans' V1 rockets. I suppose these days you'd call it like a drone, sort of the earliest version of a drone, I suppose. They were the most fearsome weapons that Hitler sort of towards the end of the war sent over to terrorize and destroy the morale of the people of Britain. What was really terrifying for the people on the ground was that they would hear that they had a very distinctive, as I understand it, buzzing sound that they made. And that's why they're another nickname. They were called doodle bugs, but they were also called buzz bombs for this reason being that this buzzing sound. And what was terrifying for the people on the ground is that they would hear the buzzing sound, but the awful moment when the buzzing sound stopped, because when the motor stopped, presumably because it ran out of fuel, it was obviously the moment that it was going to drop. Now the buzzing stopped. If you're underneath it, there's a good chance that you'll be a casualty. So they were really, really, really feared. So those were the milestones of my dad's story that I knew, and inspired by the D-Day 80th commemorations, I wanted to find out more if I could. And I still want to find out more. And so with the details that come out of this episode, I'm hoping, please share it far and wide if you can to help in my effort, but I'm hoping that there will be more information from other people out there to help myself and my family build as complete a picture as we can of my father's involvement in the war and his early life, which we know very little of. So my father, as I said, was in his 94th year when he died. He has 10 years ago. He has a surviving still now younger brother called Terry, my Uncle Terry, our Uncle Terry, because I have two sisters, Helen and Louise. And I decided that I've chatted with Terry about the war and what he knew over in the past, in recent years particularly. But I decided to phone him. He's in a care place in Sheffield, and I decided to call him over the weekend, see how he's doing. I'm pleased to say he's still doing great. He's closing in on 100 years now, still as sharp as a tack, uh, and appears to be in good health. I thought that I would see if there was anything else. I know he seems to I don't know, enjoy is the right word, but he he's enthusiastically, let's put it that way, talks about things from my father's past, and I'm always very grateful when he does, because you pick up new bits of information, and I certainly got some information I wasn't aware of from the call that I made over the weekend. So that the big sort of bombshell information for me was that my father signed up to be in the Territorial Army when he was working in Kensington. And it was a result of that signing up that he was part of a group that was sent over to Dunkirk to help with the withdrawal of the Allied forces from France in those terrible circumstances, because the war had broken out after war had been declared after the invasion by Hitler of Poland. And then there was the phony war when nothing really happened for a short amount of time, but then it all kicked off. And Allied forces were sent over to France to begin a pushback against the Nazis, but it went very, very badly wrong. The Germans had the upper hand and had pushed the troops. This is in the Somme area. Had pushed the troops back to such a desperate situation where they were on the coast at Dunkirk, and they had to be withdrawn because we needed to save military assets, people particularly, and other things, tanks and whatever, planes and ships. We had to save them in order to continue the war. So it was very, very important to get as many of these assets, particularly people, home to England. And the those troops that were stranded, waiting to be evacuated, hoping against hope to be evacuated in Dunkirk, they were being subject to the most aggressive bombing from the air. And it must have been absolutely terrifying. So the military command in England were tackling this huge problem at the beginning of the World War II, so 1940 time. And they, just to give a sort of idea of how desperate it was, they requisitioned all the small craft that they possibly could. Boats. Small boats. Why small boats? Because they had to go into shallow water on the beach of Dunkirk in order to pick men up and ferry them out to the battleships that couldn't get into the shallow water to take them back to England. The small boats were like, many of them were like sort of River Thames cruisers, actual cruisers that they had been identified that were moored on the River Thames, for instance. So really, totally unsuited to military situations. But they got a good number of them. I'm not sure how many. They were dubbed at the time the little ships. And they all sailed, they assembled in Ramsgate, and they all sailed out to pick up as many men as possible. And all of this is commemorated rather well in the 2017 movie, which I watched again last night with Christine, Dunkirk, which you can, for the moment, for a few days, still watch without charge on BBC iPlayer. So I do encourage you to do that. But I did not know that my father's first involvement with the war was to be sent over to Dunkirk. So what happened to him? Well, Terry put it this way. He said, Tom was sent over to Dunkirk to organize the retreat. He missed getting on the last boats back, and as a result of that, he was captured by the Germans, and he spent the entire war in a prison camp in Germany. So he literally missed the boat. And you can imagine he was sent over to help with the organization of the retreat, and no doubt was regarded as somebody who would not be the highest priority for, and the fact that he was helping with organizing the retreat meant that he would probably stay behind until the last group of men were evacuated. Well, he missed it and he was captured. So that operation was between the 26th of May and the 4th of June, 1940, the retreat period. Terry told me that Tom didn't actually return to London after being liberated until after the V-Day celebrations. He missed those celebrations. So those bits of information were entirely new to me. Gave me a thirst to try and find out more. Christine helped me with doing some internet research, and we established a few more things. So the date of my father's capture was the 5th of June, 1940. From what I can gather, he was probably freed from the prison camp by American troops in or around March of 1945. He was, the prisoner of war camp that he was in was called Stalag. I think that's just the German word for prisoner of war camp, actually. Stalag IX-C. The 9 is in Roman numerals, 1x, dash C. And there is a Facebook page for people who have any, well, people like us, I suppose. So I have joined that, and I intend to post a link in there, if they'll allow me to that Facebook group, in hopes of perhaps connecting with people who can give us more information. That would be terrific. So we'll see. The V-Day celebrations were on the 8th of May, 1945. So we now know that he missed those. So he must have come back some time after that. And now what I don't know, and I haven't, Terry doesn't seem to be able to tell me, what I don't know, and I imagine it's very painful for Terry to think about and talk about, actually. It's his parents, his family that we're talking about here, that were wiped out by this V1 bomb. I don't know whether my father learned about this unimaginable tragedy before he left Germany, or whether he found out about it when he got back. I'd always thought that he he arrived back to find it. That's what I thought. I'll explain a bit why. If I remember, I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. But I want to give a bit more information about the incident itself, the tragic bomb, just so that perhaps if people have any connection with any of these addresses or anything like that, dates, names that you're going to hear, whether anyone will be able to help with the information that we so desperately would like to get if possible. So the V1 bomb, the doodlebug, the buzz bomb, hit my father's parents' house on the 15th of June, it said on the internet, 1944. The address of that house was, because there's no house there anymore, 37 Raymouth Road. I think it's commercial there now, the properties. 37 Raymouth Road, Bermondsey, in the borough of Southwark. The internet said the incident took place, the bomb struck the house on the 15th of June 1944. Using AI, I did a bit more research and actually, as a result of that, found a record of the actual bomb hitting, the time that it hit. It was actually not the 15th of June, but the 16th of June, because it was 17 minutes past midnight. Wow, the things you can find out on the internet. And actually, that's my little sister's birthday. I have two sisters, an older sister called Helen and a younger sister called Louise. And it's Louise's 16th of June coming up in the next couple of days, Louise's birthday. The three occupants of 37 Raymouth Road, Bermondsey, were killed, one would hope, instantly by the impact. They were my father's father, who had the exact same name as my father, Thomas John Coe. He was born on the 29th of April, I'll say that again. He was born on the 29th of April, 1897. We don't normally say dates with an 18 in them, do we, when we're talking about our families? But he died as a young man. He was 47, I believe, when the bomb struck. The other adult in the house was his wife, who has a name very close to my little sister's name. It's not, my little sister is Louise. His wife's name was Louisa. But their second name is the same, Caroline. Obviously, Coe is the same. Louisa was born on the 22nd of September, 1899. And their son, their youngest son, my dad and Uncle Terry's little brother, was named Anthony George Coe. And he's obviously who I was named after, although I didn't find that out until relatively recent years. Anthony George was born in 1933, so he was aged, 10, I guess, 10 or 11, between 10 and 11 years. A little boy whose life was so tragically cut short. My father's father was a fire guard. They were, as I understand it, volunteers in neighborhoods, like a sort of neighborhood watch, a volunteer type of person who was particularly focusing on fires, fires breaking out and alerting the communities so that quick action could be taken. All three of them were buried, I discovered, in Nunhead Cemetery. Apparently a remarkable cemetery. I've never been there, but we'll be going there definitely, in Southwark. They were buried, all three of them, on the 22nd of June, 1944. Interestingly, another little snippet came from the research. A person called Michael visited the graves and left tributes on all three as recently as the 17th of December 2012. If anybody knows who Michael might be, I imagine he has some kind of connection with Bermondsey. He obviously knew the family. As I say, he left tributes on all three graves on the 17th of December 2012. So if anybody knows Michael, please do let us know. Uh, I discovered, well, uh, the first sort of big landmark about beginning to learn, when I learned about the unimaginable incident, was when I was, as a little boy, rummaging in the attic of my family home, and I found a leather briefcase that contained a lot of old stuff. I didn't know what it was going through it, as a little boy would. I can remember a watch with a red strap in not a very good condition, and various other things, old things. Uh, but my discovery was rudely brought to an end by a very irate father uh, who was not happy that I was going through this stuff. And obviously one can imagine why, because I discovered that it was the stuff that he had recovered from the rubble. Well, I don't know whether it was him that directly recovered it or whether he was handed it when he got back to London. I just don't know. But he was not obviously happy. And, I totally understand why that would be. So those are the new facts that I found out, and it's we're now very thirsty, as I say, to find out anything more that we can about this whole. Uh, I mean, it's something that's been really impactful in our lives, in our families' lives, because, well, self-evident really, but my father was clearly very, very traumatized uh, by the war, and most especially losing his entire family. And that has had that's ricocheted, I think, throughout our family, because he was, I mean, he went through a terrible depression at one stage. Uh, but I'd like to link this now in closing to again echo what I said at the beginning of how fragile our freedoms are, really, and how fragile democracy is. And we mustn't forget, these commemorations are so important. We just mustn't forget how close we came to losing our freedom, uh, how close the Nazis were to invading England. And had they not, had it not been for these brave soldiers, these heroes, had it not been for them, we could have a very, very different world now. So we owe them obviously a huge debt of gratitude. We owe it to them not to forget their contribution and not to forget what we owe them. But especially not to forget this for our own sakes, because what's happening what's happening with Ukraine, of course, has terrifying echoes, doesn't it, of what happened in World War II, and Putin's evil. it's not far different, is it, than if different at all from Hitler's. And Hitler rose. I mean, I'm watching a docu-series on Netflix at the moment about Hitler and the Nazis. And he rose to power through a democratic process, and then, having achieved power, became a horrific, obviously, dictator. And I'm sorry to my friends who are Trump supporters when I say this, but when I watch that docu-series and hear that story and consider Trump, it does feel as though he is capable of following a path that will lead to a dictatorship. I mean, he's already shown that he's prepared to fight and lie about his involvement in trying to frustrate a peaceful transfer of power in 2020. He's said that he won't, if he loses this upcoming election in November, he won't accept the results. And all his disciples are saying the same sort of things. And he and all his disciples don't believe in NATO. They want no part of it. And don't think that we should be supporting Ukraine, either at all or nothing like as enthusiastically as we are doing. I mean, these are dangerous, dangerous thoughts to have. Because once you allow someone like Hitler to just continue with his dastardly intentions, look where it can lead, or where it might have led, had there not been these huge sacrifices. And the supporters of Trump are saying, well, we don't even want to sacrifice taxpayers' money. We don't see why we should be spending money over in Ukraine. Nothing to do with us. Well, that was what the Americans were first saying before Pearl Harbor was bombed. And then it all changed. Thank goodness it all changed. And we came together, those of us of the free world who believed in democracy and retaining our freedoms, we came together and cut off the head of the dragon. It was that cooperation together that was pivotal. Well, it wouldn't have, no individual country could have done it. I don't think even America on its own could have done it. We must remember how the cooperation of that kind is absolutely vital to peace in the world. So those are my final thoughts. And if you could kindly spread this far and wide, because we would so, I know it's selfish, but we would so like to get more information on our dad and his involvement in the war and his family. And maybe it's the last chance to do that, because I don't even know if Michael, who visited the cemetery, is still around, but hopefully somebody will know who Michael is. That would be great. If you've got any comments on this, please do comment via our podcast Facebook page, which is the same name, Refinement, Not Retirement. Oh, that's our Facebook page. But for now, thank you for listening. It's goodbye from me. Goodbye.